Je anilo premadano karma kacho.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 1, Text 413. Katvango Nama Rajashir Natveyata Mahayushaha Muhurta Sarvam Utsrijya Katavan Abhayam Katvango Nama Rajashir Natveyata Mahayushaha Muhurta Sarva Utsrijya Katavan Abhayam Hadim
Katvango Namarajashir Yatveyata Mihaisha Urtatsarvam Utsrijya Katavan Abhayam Harim
Katvango Namarajashir
Katvango Namarajashir Yatveyata Mihaisha Bhuta Sarvamusrishya Katavan Abhayam Harim
Katvango Namarajashir Yatveyata Mihaisha Sarva Utsrijya Katavan Abhayam Harim
Katvanga King Katvanga Nama Name Rajarishi Saintly King Natva by knowing Yatam duration Iha in this world Ayusha of one's life Muhurta within only a moment Sarvam everything Utsrijya leaving aside Gatavan had undergone Abhayam fully safe Harim the personality of Godhead. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The saintly king Katvanga, after being informed that the duration of his life would be only a moment more, at once freed himself from all material activities and took shelter of the supreme safety, the personality of Godhead. Purport. A fully responsible man should always be conscious of the prime duty of the present human form of life. The activities to meet the immediate necessities of material life are not everything. One should always be alert in his duty for attainment of the best situation in the next life. Human life is meant for preparing ourselves for that prime duty. Maharaj Katvanga is mentioned herein as a saintly king, because even within the responsibility of the state management, he was not at all forgetful of the prime duty of life. Such was the case with other Ajarshis, saintly kings, like Maharaj Yudhisthira and Maharaja Parikshit. They were all exemplary personalities on account of their being alert in discharging their prime duty. Maharaja Katvanga was invited by the demigods in the higher planets to fight demons, and as a king he fought the battles to the full satisfaction of the demigods. The demigods, being fully satisfied with him, wanted to give him some benediction for material enjoyment. But Maharaj Katvanga, being very much alert to his prime duty, inquired from the demigods about his remaining duration of life. This means that he was not as anxious to accumulate some material benediction from the demigods as he was to prepare himself for the next life. He was informed by the demigods, however, that his life would last only a moment longer. The king at once left the heavenly kingdom, which is always full of material enjoyment of the highest standard, and coming down to this earth, took ultimate shelter of the all-safe personality of Godhead. He was successful in his great attempt and achieved liberation. This attempt, even for a moment, by the saintly king, was successful because he was always alert to his prime duty. Maharaj Parikshit was thus encouraged by the great Shukadeva Goswami, even though he had only 7 days left in his life, to execute the prime duty of hearing the glories of the Lord in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. By the will of the Lord, Maharaj Parikshit instantly met the great Shukadeva Goswami, and the great treasure of spiritual success left by him is nicely mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the setting for this particular verse is a preparation for the speaking of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Maharaj Parikshit, having been cursed to die within 7 days by the unqualified son of a Brahmin, prepared himself by taking a vow for fasting and not sleeping for the final goal, final end. A final end which every one of us has to one day face. As much as we may not like to contemplate it, each of us has to one day die. And nowadays, death is often taken out of the experience of persons, except for those who are doctors or nurses. Very often, many people never get to see someone dying. But death is considered in some ways to be the most important moment of one's life, or you can say the most important moment of one's life, if we take the moment just before death. Because the moment before death determines our future. If, for example, you had to find a particular moment within this lifetime, let us say now at present, which is going to affect the rest of your life. Say you plan to live, or you hope to live for another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and if everything is to be determined by one moment, that moment would be very, very important. So certainly this is so for the final moment, because the final moment determines our present, our next life, the kind of body which we get, both the gross body, the senses, the the subtle body, the mind, the intelligence, the ego, all of these are going to be determined at that final moment. Now, I think every one of us probably would make certain changes. If we had our, preferences, I suppose that each one of us would probably remake themselves slightly differently, right? Nobody feels that they're, a perfect creature. Everybody would admit that they could use a little bit more brain power, a little bit finer intelligence, a little bit better memory, sharper memory. Those of us who wear glasses wish that we had better eyesight, and people who suffer from so many disorders wish that they didn't have a body like that. Well, so all this could have been fixed up in a better way if we understood that our present body was given to us because of the final moment's consciousness. Of course, a material body, no matter how fine it may be, has its problems. It's going to be subject to the influence of time. And time naturally wears away everything. Even great mountains, are eroded in the course of time. So what to speak of something which is simply made of something as mutable as this material body? It will be destroyed. But there is a body which is never destroyed, and that is the spiritual body. It is lying dormant. It is lying dormant at the present moment. It is not destroyed, but it is there in a potential state. And this spiritual body, once one revives or allows it to become manifest, will never be dismantled, as this body is. So the real purpose of the human form of life is to prepare oneself to be able to have this spiritual body manifest. And this is specifically something which can be done by us as human beings. So, Maharaj Krishna was not very dismayed, or you can say if he was, having heard this narration about Padmanga Maharaj, he should have been encouraged. That's the purpose for which Sukadeva Goswami is narrating this story about Padmanga Maharaj. It is to encourage his student, because this is one of the ways that you encourage students. You tell them about the success of previous students or previous persons. And that is the whole idea behind the disciplined succession of acharyas. Acharya means one who teaches by his example. We have before us a line of spiritual teachers, each of whom has achieved perfection, success. And so we feel encouraged that if they could do it, so if I follow their example, if I follow their lead, then I may also become successful. And this is the function of Guru. Guru is there both to address us, to respond to our questions, to remove our doubts, and above all, to show us an example of how it is possible to pursue our spiritual life up to success. Now, the example given to Maharaj Krishna is very appropriate, because what example would you want to show a king? If you show a king the example of a Brahmin, well, he may say, well, that's all right, but I'm not a Brahmin. You have to show a king the example of another king, you see, and not just any other king, but a king who, in one sense, has to do more than Maharaj Krishna. In other words, if you want to impress someone, then show them something even more difficult, which will immediately make them recognize that their task is not that impossible. Just like we're showing the example, a classic example of Krishna and Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Why? Because Arjuna pretty much has to pass tests, which I don't think any one of us is ever going to have to pass. No one is going to be told, okay, Here's a weapon, kill your grandfather. Here's a weapon, kill your teachers. Here's a weapon, kill your best friends. Here's a weapon, kill your brother. I mean, people are pretty attached to their families, right? They all have attachments to family. It's not very easy to give up such attachments. So Arjuna had to do what we are not probably able to do. We're not going to have to do it, I would suspect. We're not going to have to pass such a test. The test is so difficult to show us how it's possible to pass our tiny tests, which, we are struggling with, which should make us recognize our own position relative to Arjuna's. We're not such great heroic personalities. Anyway, Maharaj Krishna is a great heroic personality. So Sukadeva Goswami knows I'm going to have to come up with a really good example. So he picks an example from history, and we consider these histories. He picks an example from history of the king, Khatpanga, who was such a great king that even the demigods, asked his help, which is unusual, because what business do the demigods, for what reason do the demigods have for begging help from a human being? Well, they did in this case, because even though they're very powerful, they knew that this king was more capable than any one of them. Otherwise, they had no reason to call upon him. And so they did it. And true to their expectation, this king enabled the demigods to defeat the demons in battle. And they were very much pleased. And so they gave this king a boon. You can ask anything you want from us. Again, and all of these are extraordinary examples. Maharaj Parikshit was not called upon to fight in the heavenly planets. And so, this is a pretty good example. And as far as this boon goes, these demigods who control the universe, both from the point of view of controlling the rising and setting of the sun, the movement of the stars, the movement of the waters, down to the blinking of an eyelid. That is what we are told, that they are so much, there's tremendous control. They had the ability to say, ask of me anything that you want. And what did he say? Did he say, give me palaces made of lapis lazuli and, emeralds and pearls, or give me a body that's, indestructible, just like the Radhikasipu said, give me a body that will never be vanquished. Did he say, as Ravana wanted, give me thousands of beautiful damsels? What boon did he ask for? He said, just tell me how much time I have left to live. He didn't ask for anything terrible. He just said, how much time do I have left in my life? I wonder again how many of us would have asked that boon. It doesn't seem like a boon, does it? Because you don't get anything. In fact, the only reason you'd ask that question is so that you give up everything. Again, I really wonder. Probably we'd say, ask any boon. He said, okay, I want a boon. Can anybody think of a boon besides that boon? I think there is a better boon. There's a better boon. Now, I think there's a better boon than praying for devotional service. It's the boon that Bhaktivedanta has. He should have said, okay, I want the boon that every single living being in this universe is liberated. Why didn't he ask that for? That's right, because the demigods can't deliver that. That boon can only be delivered by Mukunda, Krishna, the giver of liberation. The demigods themselves have no ability to get free from the cycle of birth and death. They also have to pray for such a boon. So, we can say, therefore, he did pray for the best boon that he was able to get from these persons.
But in that case, if somebody asks that kind of a boon, wouldn't it be counterproductive to the desires of other living beings or living the fruit of their desires?
Okay, we will answer that question in time. That's a very good question. The question is whether, we'll answer it after a few minutes, but I'll repeat the question so I remember it, please. The question is that if one asked that boon to get everyone liberated, wouldn't that interfere with the individual desires of others? That would take that up. Let us just finish this point. He got this boon, and what did Maharaj Tattvanga pray? Give me the boon, I want to know how much time I have left to live. And what was the response? Only a moment. He didn't say you got an hour, or what to speak of 7 days. The king had 7 days, so you can see the king's time is much more, Parikshit's time is much more than Kantvarma Maharaj. He said, you got a moment. Immediately, he transferred himself back to this world and prepared himself, fixed himself in devotion. How does one fix oneself in devotion? That will be described gradually in the Bhagavatam. How you disengage yourself from all worldly entanglement. Worldly entanglement means you can say the extended entanglement of family, activities, possessions. Just like Maharaj Parikshit did. He did this. 7 days time he had. Immediately gave up his kingdom, renounced his family, etc. And all things along with it. But there's something further, because that's not enough. Just like I was hearing that one of my godbrothers, Upendra, when he was leaving his body, he was in a coma, liver disease. So he became unconscious, and then after a while he came back to consciousness, and he immediately said, I want to eat a donut. He said, I want a donut. And I heard from persons who were in Vrindavan, also someone was passing away, they also said, what did they ask for? Huh? What did you want? A tomato. Right. So, these seem to be very insignificant. Give me a donut. Or give me a tomato. But it does indicate that there are so many little desires which are lingering within us. So when we have to renounce, it's more than just, in one sense, to renounce the extended items are probably easier than to renounce the desires. And the desires are very strong. I mean, if that's all that each of these individuals had left, they're, in better shape than I would be. If only desire left is a tomato or a donut, I figure that, you might be able to get away with that. Go back to God. You are? Huh? Probably, you might get away with that. But if there are stronger desires, as we know, and there are so many strong, powerful desires, and these have to be renounced. Now, how do you do that? You have to dissolve the different types of bodies. That's the description given on one level. You have to gradually, you offer the different types of energies into each other, from gross to subtle. From earth, the earth is offered into the water is offered into the fire, the fire is offered into the air is offered into the ether. This is a type of, what we call this, hermetic type of understanding of how gross becomes subtle, and the ether is offered into the ego, into the mind, which is offered into the intelligence, which is offered into the ego. In other words, you still come to that point, don't you? You gradually understand that I am not any of these things. When we say offer, we mean you give up attachment to these things. There's not some type of a chemical or biological, method, but it is a method of consciousness. in which you distinguish the different parts of your, of your being, and you gradually free yourself from identifying with them, until you're only left with what? With the soul. And that soul, you understand, you identify as part and parcel of Krishna, of God. In what relationship? As servant of God. So this is what one has to do at the final moment of one's life. And then one can, be free. Otherwise, you're not free, you're bound. Well, there's so much discussion going on about what is freedom, what is bondage. But freedom and bondage have to be understood in terms of connection or imprisonment, you can say, in this world. Now, people may not like this type of philosophy. Modern day theologians don't like this type of negativity, bondage to this world, because it means that this world is bad or evil. And then you can't, they don't like this type of symbolism that the world is bad or evil. The world should be good. It's the creation of God. And people are good, and the basis of living in this world is to do good and to improve this world. That's the whole basis of, of the motivation for improving history. Well, that's not the way it was looked upon by the original founders of any religions. They just didn't see it that way. You can say, well, that's the way we see it. We're modern and we have to speak to modern people, but well, then you have to create a modern religion. You can change your religion, and that's pretty much what modern day religious people do. They take whatever is useful and suits the need of the day, and whatever it isn't, they just leave it behind. Well, we haven't come to that stage yet. In Krishna Consciousness, we're still trying to hold on to everything. And holding on to everything, we understand this world as bondage. And this body is a bondage. We see dualism. We believe that there's this difference between the soul and the body. The soul is, you can say eternal, and the body is temporary. In that sense, we say good and bad. And why do we say the world is evil or bad? Only because it's temporary. Well, our preference is not good or bad. We really don't use those words. What we say is eternal and temporary. And that's the way we identify the different energies, how they function. Krishna's spiritual energy its nature is that it's eternal. It creates, or you can say it shapes itself in a type of eternal way. Whereas the material world shapes itself in temporary forms. And because it's constantly changing, and because we're attached to each of those forms, we suffer. And this is an analysis of why suffering is there. In that sense, we say bad, because no one wants to suffer. Even modern day theologians want to get rid of suffering. That's still their intention. So, in any case, coming to the point that the king heard this example, Parikshit Maharaj did hear this example, and therefore he was encouraged that as Tamal Maharaj did, now you can do. Now, coming to this question of our doctor, that what is the position of praying that I want to see everyone liberated? Isn't that interfering with the individual desires of others? Yes, it is interfering with them. It is interfering with them in the way that a parent might interfere with the desires of a child who wants to test how many donuts he can eat. And the parent says, you should only eat 1 or 2 donuts. If the kid says, no, I want to eat the whole bag of donuts. I don't think a parent will allow their child to eat a bag of donuts. Neither do I think a parent will allow the child to try and see if he can fly by jumping off the 7th story of his house. In other words, those who have knowledge sometimes interfere for the sake of those they love. In the same way, we hope that we love other living beings. And we judge that other living beings are depriving themselves of a great happiness. And therefore we may pray that despite their own temporary desires, we would like to affirm on their behalf what their soul desires. Because this is actually the point, that although it may interfere with others' desires, we think that there's a different desire that they have within their soul. In other words, we think that eternally they have a much greater desire than any of the temporary desires which they're at this moment aware of. Does it mean, therefore, that we interfere with the law of karma? Yes. Krishna consciousness does interfere with the law of karma. It is said that when you practice devotional service, the reactions which normally would come are mitigated. They're at least diminished, if not totally nullified. And not only is that so for yourself, but it can be so for others. What else is the advantage of sadhu sangha? Saintly association is so powerful that even someone may not ask for it, or wish it, or understand it, it still acts. Just like it is said that bathing in the Ganges River purifies, even if it doesn't appear to be clean water sometimes. It acts, it affects. So a saintly person's association, even though someone may not desire it, is beneficial. For example, that is called Bhaktivedanta Sukriti. We are unaware of the fact, but it is Sukriti, it is pious. You get pious results. Just like Prabhupada walking down the street, and a very nice gentleman. Prabhupada looks like a very nice gentleman. And someone in the neighborhood may say, "Good morning." Greeting, wishing good to a saintly person is a Gata Sukriti. They didn't realize it. They just thought, well, I'm just being, just a decent neighbor and saying good morning. No, they did something much more than that. So, we may interfere like this with the law of karma in a positive sense. And there's no hope with that. There's no hope.
Can I keep arguing?
Yes, of course.
Looking the other way, wouldn't that even be interfering with the desires of Lord? Because the Lord created the world to fulfill the desires of these individuals. To cut them short, their desires won't be fulfilled.
No.
Possibility they'll be back to fulfill
No.
their
That your analysis of why the Lord created the world is not complete. The Lord created the world to fulfill the desires of the living being, but there's a purpose for which He wanted to fulfill those desires, so that by fulfilling those desires, they could actually come to their true desire, which is His own desire, that they all be reunited in the kingdom of God. The only purpose of this material world is not simply to create like an amusement park, Six Flags, by which all the living beings can just enjoy like anything.
But isn't the same hypothesis that God assumes that after they know how useless their desires were, then the real desire will come true to them, and they will voluntarily go towards it?
Yeah, there's different ways that one can become rich. You see, one way is by hard work, and pretty much that's the way we should think if we want to get rich, that's how it's going to come. But there's another way also, that's by inheritance. Even without working, you can get rich, or by just the kindness, of someone else, in other words. So you're quite right that normal way of advancement is by trial and error, by learning process. But another way of advancement is by mercy. You see, this, when we say advancement, I'm speaking here of perfection, siddha. So there's different types, sadhana siddha, kripa siddha, and of course nitya siddha. Sadhana siddha means by practice, and kripa siddha means by mercy, and nitya siddha means the person has always been perfect and never stopped being perfect. So sometimes it is not often, but sometimes one can become perfect simply by the mercy of the pure devotee.
Put it in most times that the mercy will act on them by letting them see through the futility of their desires.
Yeah. That can be, but there, as I said, there's different ways. You're saying, I think they should only get mercy in this way. But mercy doesn't work that way. Sometimes I'll give you an example. A rich man has millions of dollars. He can bestow it upon his children in different ways. He can give it to them in a plan where they get, $100,000 a year, thinking that if I give it to them all at once, they'll spoil it. Or he may just decide, I'm going to leave the whole bundle and let them use it. It's up to him. So, your point is well taken, but it doesn't mean that Krishna cannot. What is the final point? The final point is that one's material desires be given up. Now, if by the power of a pure devotee that were possible instantaneously, who's going to argue? I mean, the purpose is not how you give up the desire, but to give them up. So if you can get rid of them instantaneously, and I agree with you, it's very rare. It says this in Shastra, in the Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada points out, Kripa Siddha is very, very, very rare. It doesn't happen usually. But it's possible. That's my only point. It's possible. It is possible. But what you're saying is what normally happens. It's by a gradual process. And in a sense, we can say that we stress this much more, I would say, than most religions do, because many religions more or less depend on a special act of mercy. Whereas we depend constantly on mercy to enable us to practice. We put great emphasis on practice, as your questions would suggest that we should do, and we do that. But it's possible. So all I'm saying is, I think the point is, and this is a real question, I think, that when I raised the question of what would you do if you had any prayer to request, and then I suggested pray like Vasudeva Dutta, I think that the problem with this is that Vasudeva Dutta's prayer had the power within it to induce Lord Chaitanya to deliver every one of the universe. Whereas if we said it, first of all, I don't know if we would say it, but even if we did, I don't know how powerful is that prayer. I mean, that God is not bound that anything that comes out of your mouth he could fulfill. Because if that were the case, I know that Maharaja would just say, okay, $100,000 on the spot. Our problems are going to be solved. We're going to put it in the parking lot. We're going to finish off these buildings, and I'm going to put some fixed deposits away, and I don't have to worry about meeting expenses, and I'll finish over my house. So it's obvious that God is not bound to fulfill everything that comes out of one's mouth. That's the next point. That Dutta he was very sincere. His prayers were sincere. So I think we have to recognize that not every prayer has equal sincerity.
Prabhupada's mission, though, wanting the world to become Krishna conscious, it's just that he could have remained in Vrindavan, but the fact that he came to the West, wrote so many books, and were distributing so many books, is to create a good fortune for many, many people.
Yeah. I think we do interfere to some extent with people's lives. I mean, when we go out and preach, of course you could argue that the person was ready. I'm ready to accept that argument. That someone, the book distributor needs the person, by the desire that individual has come to the point of being ready to receive a book. But there's also, to some extent, the free will of a book distributor that he can bestow mercy. It is said that a Madhyam Adhikar has the ability to freely give something. Freely give it means even it's called, this is a type of, you get good fortune in a way, it's special fortune. It's created by a Madhyam devotee. In other words, the accruement of fortune, which has led to our taking Krishna consciousness, partially has come by the uncaused mercy of devotees. Because what is the nature of bhakti? Bhakti is causeless. Ahoituki, apratyata. It is causeless. You can't say that bhakti comes as a result of bhakti, because at some point you didn't have the bhakti, at least we're not manifesting, and yet it started. Now, if you say it started because I accrued a lot of material piety, then there's a problem with that. How can a purely transcendental thing be earned simply by the accruement of material piety? Bhakti has to come from bhakti. But if you don't have it, this is very similar, isn't it, to what Paul said. Right? This is in Christianity, you got the same setup, the same thing happening. He says, human beings are bad, evil, there's no good in us. So how are we going to deliver the human beings? It has to come by grace. It has to come by the grace of Jesus. That's what he said, that was his whole. And justification has to come by grace. In a sense, we're saying the exact same thing. That bhakti can only come by the grace of a bhakta. There's no other way it can come. And what kind of bhakta? It can't be an uttam bhakta, because an uttama bhakta just is self-satisfied. It can't come from a kanistha bhakta, because a kanistha bhakta doesn't have grace. So who does the bhakti come from? From Madhya bhakta, from the preacher. So that's an interference. It is an interference, you see. But what is that interference? It's love. If you say, that a child should not be loved because the child is naughty, no parent will agree with that. So, on behalf of the Lord, the devotee loves other living beings and interferes in their sinful life for their sake.
It may be interference or is it education, but letting them see the futility of
Now we're just quibbling over words.
That is, you're right, I agree with that.
I mean, it's quibbling over words. You may call it education, someone else may call it love, someone else will say grace. It comes to the same point. It's the rectification of the consciousness which has to be done by one means or by another. Certainly, I mean, education is a better. It's probably a better term. It's a more appealing term these days. And we do try to say that we should educate.
Certainly, Maharaja the Hunter had no good qualifications. He did horrible things. Not only took compassion on the animals, and in the same way, he took compassion on Maharaja.
And he educated them, as you said. He educated them by making Maharaja see what was going to happen to him after he died.
Give you an example of my personal experience for the last 3-4 years. I've given out books to the people I come across. And I come across somebody about 4 months ago who I had given a book to 3 years ago. Now suddenly she said, thank you for giving it to me. I just started relating with it. So sometimes those things lie dormant somewhere in the closet. And time comes and something crazy.
Absolutely. We say these books are time bombs. They're a time bomb. They have already a time clock on them, and they're going to go off at the right time when someone is ready. You're right. It doesn't happen. We've seen that. And again, when you're training, you take any parent teaching a child something, the kid can't hear it. Then the kid 5 years later says, "Now I'm ready. Now I hear it." That's life. It's like that.
And just giving an example, another gentleman I had given the book again 9 years ago, lives in our village. This particular person lives in Delhi. They got together, they get together every week and discuss. And got them independently, the book made them. He got in one heart.
Yeah, sure.
I was just thinking of the will of the Lord. Also, Krishna himself describes that those persons who go around the spirit of people by preaching, he's the most pleased with those persons. Krishna is the most peaceful creature who described Bhaktivedanta to the religious souls.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a confirmation of Krishna's will, sexual will.
Yeah.
I was saying that we have to give up our material desires until we are purified and have our true desire, which is not tainted by materialism. And at the same time, yesterday, Prajapati Prabhu was reading, Prabhupada says that we have no ambition. Does he mean the same thing as desire?
Our ambition, that type of ambition is not considered an ambition. Ambition means to satisfy Krishna is our ambition. That ambition is permissible. It may not be ambitious in terms of profit, adoration, distinction. That's what it is. That even spiritually we're not ambitious. Like, I want to become famous as a devotee. That type of ambition is not good. But to be ambitious to serve Krishna, to be ambitious to see Krishna pleased, to be ambitious to see all living beings Krishna conscious, that's welcome. Nothing wrong with that. But the ambition to be famous devotee, that type of ambition, or what to speak of material ambitions, those are not good. That's what our brothers are trying to. All right, time is up. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hey.